Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Levine.
Good morning, Dr. Garvin. May you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your name for the record?
My full name is Dr. David Fintan, Fintan, Garvin, G for golf, A-R-A, V for Victor, A-N.
Tell the jury about your profession.
So I'm currently working in District 10, which is this area, as a medical examiner. A medical examiner is a forensic pathologist. My qualifications start back. I completed my PhD in medical toxicology in 1994 in Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland. I completed medical school in Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland in 1999. I completed mandatory internal medicine and surgical rotations, which is required by our country, before entering into a pathology training program as a specialty, which was 5 years. I completed that in 2006. I started my fellowship in forensic pathology in Miami in 2006. I came here for 1 year, that was 17 years ago. I completed 3 years in different specialties within forensics in Miami, including cardiac, neuropathology and pediatric. I worked in Liverpool, England for 2 years as a forensic pathologist. I took my professional examinations in the Royal College of London in forensic pathology 2010. I then worked in New Zealand and the Pacific Islands for 5 years, travelling around the large country of New Zealand, but I was based in Auckland as a forensic pathologist. I returned to Miami in 2015 as a forensic pathologist. I was there for another 6 or 7 years. I was the deputy chief there for a period, and then I came to Polk County in 3 years ago, I think next month, where I'm working as a forensic pathologist. My other specialties are drugs or toxicology, in addition to forensic pathology.
Doctor, what does forensic pathology deal with?
So there are two types of pathologists. So if you have a lump or a bump or some part that needs to come off you, a biopsy or surgery, that will go to a pathologist, a surgical pathologist, and they will look at that under a microscope and make a tissue diagnosis, which will determine what treatment you have to, if any, that you will have to undergo after. A forensic pathologist will have done that, but we then move on to additional training where we're not looking at parts or biopsies, we're looking at the whole body, and our interest is to determine the cause of death, keeping in mind how natural disease or illnesses affect the human body, how that may cause death or impair the human body, how injuries affect the human body, either on their own or in combination with injury that may cause death or to a person, or drugs, the scene, depending on the environment where the body is found, and then the circumstances to a case, whether or not the person was involved in an altercation or not, or whether they were doing drugs or not, or a bit of both, or they were drinking, or they have some disease or illness that may have participated in the injury, the drinking, the drugs, that may provide an explanation to the police. Our purpose is to help police, or jury, or families to understand how somebody has died, or the mechanism, or what were the factors involved. We, in addition to determining the cause of death, we will determine the manner of death. The manner of death is the context within which the death has occurred. It can be natural, accident, suicide, homicide, or undetermined.
What is the definition of a homicide?
From our point of view, the medical point of view is different from a legal point of view. We do not make legal decisions. Our determinations are not the law. The law is a separate matter. But under the medical determination of homicide, it means that death has occurred as a result of a violation of some other action. So somebody has done something or made an action, or have made a series of decisions in an action which have resulted in the death of somebody else. That their action, any reasonable person would know or should have known that that action could or should cause the death of another. So homicide is the death result of the actions of another.
Dr. Garvin, as a medical examiner, what are some of your responsibilities here in the 10th Judicial Circuit?
Similar to any other jurisdiction that I work, so our job as medical examiners here, so there are no coroners in Florida. Florida is one of the progressive states. We deal with just medical examiners who are highly trained professional medical doctors who review or are involved in making the decisions if someone needs to undergo an autopsy or not. It is not a decision taken lightly. There's a lot of work done before that decision is made. Autopsies, they're a lot of work. It's not something we do lightly. So there are many ways to do it. We may be contacted by police, we may be contacted by a hospital, we may be contacted by family members because a death has occurred. By law, all deaths will be referred to us, but the vast majority will not fall under our jurisdiction. They are natural deaths. Somebody has died peacefully at home. It's not unexpected. They're of older age or they had some condition which is understood that would or could lead to their death. Police have no suspicions, families have no concerns, and that's maybe 95%, 90% of deaths will go down that route. In the other percentage of cases, there's some issue. The death is unexpected. The death was unwitnessed, and there's no particularly obvious reason why they would have died in that moment, in that location. Police may have concerns that the person may have been involved in some incident, altercation, interaction in the days, hours prior to the death, and are wondering if there's some connection. If there's a belief that perhaps some drug or drugs may have been involved, that will fall under our jurisdiction. So if there's issues, particularly legal outstanding issues or concerns from a family, doesn't always mean that somebody has done something bad. It just means that there's an unanswered question. And if we feel that an autopsy would be helpful in answering that question, we will take jurisdiction of the case, and then we will perform. So that's background information first of all. Once we decide we're going to do the autopsy, then there's this broken into several parts. The information review is no different than if you go to your doctor and they have a chart and they have all your medical information in it. They review that information before they examine you. We do exactly the same thing, it's just that you're deceased. So we'll get all that information. I can't ask you questions, but your body can tell me what's been going on. So we'll do an external examination first of all. The external examination will involve looking at you from top to toe, looking for evidence of natural disease or injuries or some clue to tell us that something happened in the environment. It might be electrical burn marks, there could be evidence of drowning, something like that. Then we'll move to the internal examination where we examine all organs, all major systems, brain, nervous tissue, heart, lungs, and so on. We may choose to take biopsies of all of those tissues to look under the microscope for the presence of natural disease that might provide an explanation as to what's happened. We will take samples for toxicology or biochemistry or microbiology, depending on what's more appropriate for each case, and send them off for testing. When we have all that information back, and it often takes weeks, nothing got to do with us, it just takes weeks for laboratories to do what they have to do. We will then pull all that information together, taking into account the narrative, the scene, medical examination, the various results. We will then form an opinion as to what was the cause of death and under what context that death took place. So each case takes many hours, and I would do approximately 300 cases a year, autopsies, and I will do external examinations only on probably another 200, and I will review another 600 or 700 that I would decide that I'm not doing anything with. So that's how many cases we would be constantly dealing with.
The external examination of a deceased individual sounds pretty obvious, but how do you do the internal examination?
The internal examination is an intrusive procedure, and we're aware of that. That's why we don't make the decision lightly. It requires that we have to open the body. You have to open the chest, the abdomen, the head, look into the pelvis, which are which is part of the abdomen examination. And if we need to do, there are many other specialist tests that we can do if we need to, which would require further intrusive methods, but they're done with as much skill as we can, so that when the bodies are returned to the families, that all of that's hidden. That's out of view. We try to close it up so that you wouldn't know the difference. But it is a very involved procedure. It's manual, it's not easy work, and it's tiring.
Now, in the normal course of an autopsy, are photographs taken of the deceased victim both internally and externally?
Yes.
And in this particular case, I'm going to have the opportunity to show you State Exhibits 125 to 155 a little bit later. Will that be helpful for you to be able to point out and explain some of the injuries and some of your findings that Kathy Griffith suffered?
Yes.
Now, in this particular case, the death happened on a Sunday, September 8th. Describe to the jury the process by which you receive the body and when you typically conduct an autopsy.
So the only reason why this case is with me is because that was my week. There's no other reason. We work on rotations. So I would have first met this case on Monday morning. I would not necessarily have heard about it on the Sunday. I don't remember, to be honest with you. I just don't. So when I went in on Monday morning, her name plus other names were on that list that morning, and that's the first time I would get to read the police report to find out that's the beginning of the narrative. In all homicide cases, police do attend those cases, the investigating detectives, which is very useful because then I can have a much more one-to-one conversation. So that's where I would have got my information.
Do you work for the State Attorney's Office? Do you work for me?
I do not.
Do you work for law enforcement?
I do not.
Who do you work for?
I work for the public.
All right, Dr. Garvin, the autopsy that you performed on Katherine Griffith, describe to the jury a little bit about the room or operating location where you do your autopsy.
So our autopsy suite is it's a custom built place. It's got two stations where we can conduct our examinations. We tend to use one. It's an open. It's no different from an operating area. We don't have to have the high clean room specifications of an operating theatre, but it's no different. There's a table and there's ventilation and there's instruments and they're all laid out and so on and so forth. So it would look quite similar to an operating table.
Now, before we get to the cause of death and the manner of death towards the end of your testimony, I want to ask you about your autopsy findings. What can you tell the jury about the injuries that Kathy Griffith suffered?
Do you want me to go through all of them in detail or just a summary?
First, we can start with a summary.
So the autopsy findings, a sharp force injury to the right side of the neck, bruising to her lower limbs, bruising to the posterior right shoulder, left elbow, back of both hands. There was an incised wound, and I'm going to explain the difference between an incised wound and a stab wound in a second, between her thumb and index finger of the right hand. So here there's an incised wound that was 1.5 centimeters. It was gaping if you open the hand, so 1 centimeter. A stab wound is a wound that is deeper than it is longer on the surface. An incised wound is a sharp force injury as well, that's longer on the surface than it is deeper. They're the opposite. So in an incised wound, the sharp blade or the sharp surface has come across the skin, but has not gone deep into it. A stab wound is the opposite. It's penetrated and gone into the actual tissue.
Was that gaping incised wound, was that a fresh wound?
Yes.
And describe to the jury why that is.
Because there's no evidence of healing. It's gaping, it's opened, and it had dry blood in it.
Now, is that gaping incised wound consistent with being a defensive wound?
It's possible that, defensive wounds are, so that's a term that's used, and I know it's thrown around a lot. We personally don't write down classic for defensive wound because we don't know precisely what were the circumstances of what happened. But let me explain what the greater points of a defensive wound are. Defensive wounds is a term that's used when there's a series of injuries that can be bruises, can be incise wounds, it can be any other cuts or abrasions that are present on certain locations. And the reason why there's certain locations is that you have to understand that fundamentally the human will or the human body is designed to survive. Everything about us when we're under attack, when we're in a fight or flight situation, regardless of the circumstance, that if the human person is conscious enough to understand that they're in a struggle for their life for whatever reason, they will engage in activities which will try to help them survive. If you're under attack from an assailant, it is quite typical if the person is swinging something at you, baseball bat, fist, whatever, you will tend to try and protect yourself. And in doing so, certain parts of your body become exposed to that force that's coming at you as you try to defend yourself. In the arms, it's typically here. If it's a bat or a stick or something that's coming at you. They may also be on the legs. Typically, and it's more common in women, if they're being attacked, but it happens in men too, they will tend to offer the outside of the leg as they're trying to protect their sexual organs, or they're trying to protect themselves if they're under attack. So we will often find wounds on the outside of the legs, not the inside. In knife injuries, when someone is under attack where there's a knife or a sharp implement involved, it's common that the person, unfortunately, mistakenly, will try to grab that knife thinking that this is somehow going to be of help to them. It isn't really, generally, but in doing so, if they grab that blade and then that blade is pulled, you'll often find incised wounds across the palm of the hand, or it can be here, depending on how the knife is grabbed. Or it could very well be that as the hand goes up to defend against the oncoming blade, that blade just comes through here and then cuts as it comes through. Because I don't know specifically, we don't have a video of how exactly those injuries occurred. We tend not to use that term, defensive injuries, but that is what's meant by them. They're present in certain locations under certain circumstances that may indicate that the person who is now deceased was trying to defend themselves at the time of the assault.
Now, you mentioned that Kathy had bruises on her upper and lower limbs. Does that mean arms and legs?
Yeah, so again, I know it seems a bit impersonal, but we say the lower limbs and the upper limbs because we're talking about the whole arm. When we want to talk more specifically, we tend to use the anatomical location, whether or not it's the anterior elbow or the posterior forearm or whatever it might be. But upper limb is the entire limb from here to the fingers.
What were you able to determine about the bruises on Kathy regarding whether they were old bruises or new bruises or a combination? Yeah,
so dating of bruises is not it's not an exact science. We do not. TV shows I know do that all the time. That's not reality. What I can say is that these bruises, there were quite a number of them present. All we can say about bruises is that if the colour yellow is present, we can say that it's definitely not. There wasn't an immediate before death bruise, because yellow would suggest that at least 15, 16, 17 hours has passed since that bruise was present. It could be weeks, but at least 17 or 18 hours has passed. That's the best we can do in reality. But all these bruises in this particular case did look fresh in that there was no colour change. It doesn't look like they had gone or had the opportunity. The person wasn't alive long enough for the body to try and heal or start healing a bruise. So that's the best I can say to you.
Dr. Garvin, before we get to the photographs, how can you describe Kathy's neck wound to the right side of her neck?
So the wound on the right side of the neck is a large stab wound. It's gaping, and gaping means that it's an obvious. Once you see it, it can't be anything else. It's an open wound. It was 4.3 centimeters long and 1 centimeter apart. It's 2.5 centimeters right off the midline, so approximately here, and 23 centimeters from the top of her head. So we do that just to give you an anatomical location. So approximately here on her neck is where it was. The wound is in the 9 to 3 o'clock orientation, meaning that if you look at a clock, 9 to 3 means it's kind of looking straight when the body's in the right, so it's coming straight across here. And there's a square edge to the 9 o'clock margin. That's important, because the square edge suggests to me that it's a single blade, not a double blade. That is the knife or the blade that's been used to cause. So there are characteristics of a knife wound which help us determine if it's a single blade or a double blade. And in this case, excuse me, in this case, it would suggest the blade was single bladed. So the wound then goes into the neck. It travels from a front to back, so it's coming in from the front and heading towards the back. It's traveling right to left, and in doing so, and it has gone through. So the esophagus, the food pipe, has gone through the trachea, the windpipe, and it's just above the vocal cord. So it's transected the trachea right across, and the food pipe. And the blade continues so that the top of the blade came out the other side. So there's a small sharp force injury on this side. It's 0.6 by 0.2, so quite small, but it shows that the tip of the blade met it all the way across and poked out this side.
What type of force is necessary for the knife not to just enter the body, but to do all that traveling that you mentioned and actually go out the other side of her neck?
You know, we often get asked this question. In fact, we always get asked this question: how much force is required? We don't know, right? We don't have the ability to be there to measure newtons, pounds per square inch, or whatever. But what we can tell you is that one of the major qualities, the most influential quality of how easy a knife will penetrate the human body, is the tip of the knife. The tip of the knife, once it punctures or penetrates the human skin, it's relatively easy for the knife to then enter, because our organs and our tissue they don't offer much resistance. So I can't tell you how much force was used, but I can tell you it can be surprisingly not as much required as you might think. However, in this case, it's gone through the trachea. The trachea is a tougher organ or tissue. It's got cartilage in it, so it would require the application of some pressure for it to continue to the other side. But I can't tell you in pounds per square inch how much that pressure is.
Now, have you had the opportunity to conduct autopsies on multiple stab wound victims over your years?
I've done many hundreds.
And do you see any consistencies amongst those in terms of the nature of the injury or the cause of the injury?
Well, I've seen all kinds, homicides, I've seen suicides. I don't believe I've come across any accidents, but I've seen suicides. Certainly people have used knives to take their own life, but the vast majority would be homicides.
All right, so the vast majority are homicides. You've seen some suicides, but no accidents, correct?
Not to my knowledge, no.
All right, Dr. Garvin, I'm going to show you some photographs, and hopefully it shows up on your screen. And if I have some questions about them, of course, I'll be asking you some questions. So, starting with 126, is this how the body comes to you?
Yes.
127, 128. During your autopsy, were you able to determine the victim's weight and height?
Yes.
What were those stats?
She was 5'2" and 126 pounds.
Is that a picture of the stab wound?
Yes, as the body arrived before it's cleaned, yes. That's the same wound after it's been cleaned.
Now you mentioned the gaping wound and the definition being wide open. What is it that we're actually seeing once you get past into the hole there?
You're looking at the internal structures of the neck. So the head is back, so it obviously pulls on it to make it gape more, but there are other reasons. It's a lot more details to it. So there are things called the lines of Langerhans. When you're all young and pretty, of course, you won't know about these lines of Langerhans because your skin is nice and tight and there's no wrinkles. But as we get older, the lines of Langerhans begin to take over, and they are a natural tension line that's present in all our skin. And if we cut across the lines of Langerhans, you may be familiar with the grain of meat, then the wound are gaping. But if we cut in the same direction of the lines, which surgeons will always try and do, because then the scar will be a lot less obvious. In the neck, they are roughly coming down the neck in a straight line, so this wound has gone across them. So those lines are now apart, and that makes it gape more than if the wound was the other direction, between 12 and 6.
So in this picture...
I would like for you to know, if you need it, that mouse over there operates as a pointer.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Actually, I didn't know that, but thank you.
Could you please point with the mouse and the red arrow? Where's the visible organ within her neck?
So in here, you can see that there's a structure present here. This is probably part of the larynx, probably part of it, but clearly it's a gaping wound, and you can see that there is a structure inside here. I think it's part of the larynx from looking straight in, but I'm not entirely sure. That's part of where the voice box or the larynx has been transected, so it's cut open. That should be a whole piece. It shouldn't be separated like that.
Now, in order for the end result to be the death, what happens physiologically after that knife does all that damage?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So the human neck is extremely vulnerable. It's probably the most vulnerable part of our body. So once a knife goes in, not only are there your windpipe, your food pipe, there's also a lot of arteries which conduct a lot of blood, but there are also several nerves that are traveling through the neck, the vagus nerve, the phrenic nerve, and so on, and they're coming down. If you transect them, there's immediate implications, clearly. The vagus nerve supplies the heart, and the phrenic nerve supplies the diaphragm to which you need to breathe. It has to have that bellow effect. So if they're transected, then they're not available to you anymore. So you have a combination of bleeding and severing of nerves combined will bring a rapid death.
Is the bleeding both external and internal?
I would expect this to be a bloody scene, yes.
(132). Is there any different parts of the organ visible in this picture?
No.
All right, now we continue 133. What's that there?
So that's the exit of the tip of the knife. So the tip of the knife has come all the way across the neck and has poked out here.
Is that a close-up of the exit wound?
Yes.
Now, there's a metal rod there. Describe to us what you were doing here.
So in all gunshot wounds and in stab wounds where possible, we will put in probes to show the direction that the wound is travelling in. So in this case, it's travelling right to left, upwards, front to back, and that probe is following the path, the same path that the knife followed.
What can you tell us about 137, Dr. Garvin?
So this is the internal examination. I've taken out the neck structures. You are looking at the neck from behind. So here is the epiglottis. This is the tongue, and this is the esophagus that's open, and the trachea is underneath. It will be this is the epiglottis. This is the posterior surface of the larynx, and here the blade has gone through the upper part of the esophagus, as I'm pointing out there. So this fold and this fold connect, so this would be a tube. The lumen here is your food pipe. I've opened it to show you that the blade travelled through the esophagus, which has transected the esophagus, or perforated, I should say, the esophagus.
138. What do we begin to see here?
So this is the right hand, and you can see there's a bruise here, and it's not well shown in this picture, but this is where the incised wound between the thumb and the index finger is. There's some bruising down here also at the bottom. This is the index, this is the thumb and the index finger of the right hand, and this is that incised wound that I talked about. So it is longer on the surface than it is penetrating, and it's from a sharp force injury, I suspect, from a blade.
Going back to, you mentioned the bruising. So due to the color of that bruising, does that coincide with what you were saying are more fresh bruises on Kathy?
Yeah, these do not look as if they have had time to heal or undergo the healing process.
All right, what can you tell us about 141, Doctor?
This is her left upper arm, and there's some bruising here, there's some bruising on the elbows. These are abrasions, but they are not injuries. These are post-mortem. There are differences. They happen after death, and it's got to do with many other things, but they're commonly often misinterpreted as injuries. They are not, due to their yellow, parchment-like colour. And I can appreciate if you don't see it, but there are actually small veins running through the bottom there, and that's quintessential of post-mortem, not an injury. But there are injuries, and the injuries are here, the elbow, and up here on just at the biceps, and down here.
Continue on with the close-up, and we continue with some additional photos. Now we have 143. What appears to be on the wrist area and the hand? Yeah,
so this is the left. It looks like the left upper arm. So there's that bicep bruise, and this is heavy enough bruising present on the posterior wrist and hand. Some small bruising here also.
Is that another view of it, different angle?
Yeah, and there's also just another bruise there on the back of the little finger. That's the left hand also, and the left arm, and there's some bruising here.
Can bruising be caused by if somebody grabs somebody real tightly?
Bruises, by definition, it's better to just go with the definition, and then you can work it out thereafter. So in our forensic pathology, a bruise is where blood has escaped into the soft tissue due to blunt force trauma, not due to a sharp force injury, not due to a bullet wound. It's due to blunt force trauma. What the blunt force trauma is can be a whole range of things. It could be grabbing, it could be punching, it could be falling, it could be kicking, but it's blunt force trauma.
All right, thank you, Doctor. What do we see here?
This is the other arm, that's the right arm, and there's a bruise across the triceps here. Right elbow, more bruising. Back of the right hand. I think that's the right hand, it is, yeah. And there's some bruising there on the back of it. And up here on the back of the index finger of the right hand. That's a small abrasion, minor abrasion on the right shin by the look, yes, the right shin. You can see bruising here at the back of the left, this is the left calf. There's some bruising here on the anterior shin, here, here, here. This is an abrasion along here. So an abrasion is just for your definition. So a bruising is the escape of blood into surrounding tissue. An abrasion is due to blunt force trauma, but is confined to the epidermis. So the outer layer of skin is the epidermis. So as something rubs across that for whatever reason, blunt force, comes across the skin and pulls or rips or tears that epidermis, that's an abrasion, okay, and they're only due to blunt force trauma typically.
And the last few photographs, Doctor.
This is an abrasion, but I suspect that's post-mortem. I would not probably call that an injury. That's an injury. That's an abrasion. That's a skipped-like abrasion, incomplete abrasion. So something, whatever has caused this, either it has skipped along the skin or it itself was not fully in contact with the skin as it was rubbed across the skin, causing the abrasion. Bruising is present on the forearm, here and here.
Now, from your conducting the autopsy and your training and experience, what was the cause of death?
So the cause of death is stab wound of the right neck.
And what was the manner of death?
In this case, the manner of death is homicide.
And when you say the manner of death is homicide, what does that mean?
So with the information that would have been provided to me at the time, and with the examination and what I've viewed and witnessed and reviewed, the explanation for this death is that this wound was inflicted by another person.
So is it a fair statement that it is not consistent with somebody accidentally falling on a knife?
I haven't been given that explanation before, but I think that would be rather extraordinary. No, I don't believe so.
So your end result was that the manner of death was a homicide, a killing caused by somebody else, correct?
Correct, yeah.
All right, Dr. Garvin, I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Cross?
Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
Dr. Garvin, I want to talk about injuries that can result from mutual combat or a fight where two people are mutually involved in a struggle, whatever. They can be very messy, correct?
Well, I suppose mutual combat, mortal combat could very well be messy depending on the circumstance, yes.
Well, if any two people, regardless of size, strength, etc., are involved in a fight, both can receive injuries, correct?
Yes.
And both can receive what you've termed defensive wounds, even though that's not a term of art, it's sort of a vague term.
Yes.
You would agree that both could receive those types of wounds.
Yes.
And you would agree that both could also suffer offensive wounds in such mutual combat.
Yes.
And even if somebody suffers a wound that ends up leading to their death, you don't know from your evaluation what happened leading up to that wound, correct?
So depending on the information provided by police, so I am given some information, but it depends in each case. Sometimes we know nothing, but in this case I knew something.
Right, and then the information that you get from police is their interpretation of things, correct?
Yeah, I rely upon them. I'm that's how it works. I rely on the information they give me. Yes, that's correct.
And so if they don't give you all of the information that they have, then you might be lacking some critical piece of information in making your determination.
I'd be very disappointed if that happened, but yes, you are technically correct if I'm not given all the information.
Do you also look at media accounts of what allegedly occurred?
I do not watch the news. I have no media. I have no social media. God, no. I have better things to do with my time.
So this is a weird question then. Why does the medical examiner's file in this case contain multiple media reports?
The secretaries in the office will do that as part of the thing, but I only saw them yesterday for the first time, and I don't read them, but it's common practice around the world. I've been in other offices, people do that, but it's nothing got to do with me.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah.
But basically, you cannot say what happened in the kitchen where Katherine Griffith suffered this wound, can you?
Well, I can certainly say that she suffered a fatal stab wound or has suffered fatal injuries, and based on the information provided to me at the time, that the most likely determination excuse me, is that she's died from the action of another person, therefore a homicide.
But you can't say, for example, whether Katherine Griffith attacked the other person with a knife first, right?
No.
Okay. And you don't know how everybody was positioned or whether there was a struggle over the knife or anything like that?
Not in this case. Sometimes we do, but not in this case. I did not have that detail of information.
Speaking about the bruises that you've shown the jury, those could be up to several days old, couldn't they?
So dating of bruises is tricky. There's no argument there. But in this case, I wouldn't say days, but could they have been present a couple of hours before the incident? I can't tell you.
Okay. And bruises such as we saw on the photos could happen from somebody bumping into something?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people can bruise very easily. You always get a bit concerned when there's a lot of them, and there are a lot of them. And I wasn't provided with an explanation other than a confrontation that might provide an explanation for them.
What about from doing innocuous activities like housework or things like that?
Also, yeah, it's entirely possible, and again, you would take that into account if it's as you are now, and that's perfectly fine. And yes, people can get bruises doing innocuous things, but the thing about innocuous things is that they tend to be very few bruises. They tend to be confined to one particular place, depending on what they were doing. And in this case, there's a lot of bruises, and they're in a lot of locations. So if you can give me the innocuous thing they were doing, I would consider it, but otherwise, for me, it more likely than not would be better explained being received during a confrontation.
A confrontation that could have been mutual combat.
Yeah, absolutely, a violent confrontation for whatever reason.
Do you, can you say whether somebody who has rheumatoid arthritis might bruise more easily than someone who doesn't?
It's not something I'm aware of as being a thing, but if they're taking if they're on a lot of steroids as part of the treatment, people on steroids do bruise easier.
Was there any way for you to determine whether Katherine Griffith was taking steroids for rheumatoid arthritis?
So I wasn't aware that she was taking steroids, wasn't asked about that, and even if it was, the test for steroids is extraordinarily difficult. There are very few places in the world that do it, and even if you do it and you find steroids is present and you know she's taking it, I haven't proved anything. So if somebody tells me she's taking it, that's fine, but I wasn't told that.
Right, and I'm not suggesting that that's something that you normally would have been aware of, given the fact that the autopsy happened the day after she died and you spoke with law enforcement, not family members, right?
Correct.
Right. I'm just asking about that possibility.
Sure, yeah.
In your training and experience, have you ever observed bruises that are clearly made from, say, a hand or fingers?
Yes.
So if somebody's grabbing somebody's arm,
Yes.
like I'm showing, so fingers around the arm, you would expect to see bruising that resembles the shape of the fingers.
It can do. They have a name. They're called discoid bruises, meaning looks like the pads of your finger. It can happen, and certainly I have seen them, particularly in young women that have died by strangulation. You can see, it's not in every case, but you can see the hallmarks of what looked like fingertips or somebody was grabbed by the neck by their fingers. It's also possible that if a person is strong enough and the other person is small enough, you can get similar discoid-like bruises. There's nothing about the bruise that screams at you, this is a fingertip. But what you can do is that if somebody says, could that be a fingertip? Then you can say, yes, that could be a fingertip.
Did you notice any of those types of bruises on Katherine Griffith?
Nothing that would have jumped out at me as specifically that. Yeah.
You've mentioned that the neck is a particularly vulnerable spot on the human body. There was no bone involved in this stab wound, was there?
It did not go through the cervical spine, no.
Okay, so it went through soft tissue, basically.
Soft tissue and trachea, which is cartilage. It's a
Cartilage.
little firmer, but yeah, it's not a whole
Right.
lot, but it's a little firmer.
And so far as you know, there was no clothing or any object over the Katherine Griffith's neck to also provide, say, a layer of protection beyond her own skin.
I'm not aware if there was. Yeah, I didn't see any or wasn't told about it.
You mentioned that the cartilage is a little bit tougher than some of the other soft tissue that the knife went through. And maybe this is crazy, but explain what a tracheotomy is.
So tracheotomy, you're talking about in emergency situations, not to be, I'm not trying to be facetious, but a cricoid tracheotomy or cricoid tracheotomy. If you're in an emergency situation, the person's airway is compromised for whatever reason, a crushing injury or something is blocking the airway, and you need to get air into the airway, so you bypass the blockage. So you find the Adam's apple,
Which is the trachea, right?
which is the voice box. It's the front of the voice box, more prominent in males than females. But then you come down approximately 1 finger, but as you rub there, you feel a little dip. It's very subtle, but you'll feel it. And that's where you want to make your incision. But that's not going through cartilage, it's going through this soft tissue in between.
My mistake. You mentioned in your direct testimony that you can't say with any certainty what level of force was necessary to make this wound.
No, I can't give you a number. No.
And you said that but you are aware that there are some variables that can give us some information about the level of force.
Yeah.
If you're looking at a spectrum from very little to a whole lot.
Yeah, there are, but from my point of view, it's the tip of the blade that really, once the tip of the blade overcomes the skin, the greatest resistance is from the skin.
Correct.
And once you get over that, you'd be surprised how little actually is involved. But that doesn't mean that the person wasn't using a lot of force. It just means I can't tell you.
Right, I understand. And in this particular case, the tip of the knife that that caused this wound was triangular in shape. Are you aware of that?
I don't believe the knife was shown to me. I wasn't brought the knife from memory, at least. Look, I've seen so many cases since in between. I might be missing, but I don't think. But I think I may have seen a photograph of the knife.
So what is it your understanding that it was a triangular tip?
Yeah, like a typical kitchen large carving knife, I guess is what I would call it. Yeah.
And would you agree that that type of tip is actually, geometrically speaking, is the easiest to penetrate the skin with?
Yeah, so that's a sharp tip, and that once it penetrates the skin, you don't anticipate much more force being required for it to continue in.
I want to ask you a question about the toxicology in this case. I know you personally did not perform the toxicology tests, but you received the results of the toxicology tests on Katherine Griffith's blood, right?
Yes, correct. We take the samples, they're sent to a toxicology laboratory. It's a whole different world. They live in a different place, but they're the ones who do the testing. It's up to us to do the interpretation.
Right, and in this particular case, while you didn't find that the toxicology results contributed to Katherine Griffith's death, there were some drugs in her system that you were at least concerned enough to note in your report, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'd use the word concern. I'm kind of obligated to tell the truth, and if they're in the report, I've got to report that. I can't hide it. But there were 2 drugs present, that is correct.
Okay, what were the drugs?
One drug is called alprazolam, you might know it as Xanax, and the other drug is amphetamine.
Okay, tell the jury about alprazolam.
So I'm sure I'd be surprised if you haven't heard about Xanax. It's a drug which is given, is widely abused by many people, but it's a legitimate drug. It's prescribed. Typically, it's belong to a class of drugs similar to Valium. It's a benzodiazepine, and it's used typically for anxiety. People who are prone to anxiety or have anxiety. It can be used for other reasons, but that's the main reason. People who require, who have symptoms or signs of anxiety. There might be, heartbeat, racing heartbeat, chest palpitations, whatever the case may be, not sleeping well. Typically, Xanax can be prescribed for that.
As far as some of the side effects that could occur from alprazolam, do some of those side effects, although they might be rare, include racing thoughts?
Yeah, it's like any drug. No drug is perfect. Some drugs, they can have strange side effects. It's true. Can Xanax cause the opposite almost of what it's designed to do? Like any drug, that can happen. It would be very rare, but it can happen.
What about agitation? Can Xanax cause agitation?
And oddly enough, it's paradoxical. It's given for agitation, so why would it be causing that? In very rare cases, it's been known to happen.
And what about risk-taking behavior? Can it also cause that?
Risk-taking behavior. What do you mean by risk-taking behavior?
That's just what the literature said. That's the term I'm asking about. I mean, it can be interpreted many different ways.
Yeah, it can. Yeah. It is a drug. It is a drug that's commonly abused, I suppose. So if people are using it in an abusive manner, that's not the medical reason why they were taking it or the reason why they're prescribed it. So I'm not sure what risk-taking behavior is, but it can be abused or misused.
You have no idea whether Katherine Griffith had a valid prescription for Xanax.
I do not.
The amount that was in her blood could have been well above a therapeutic dose that a doctor would prescribe, correct?
Tricky one to answer,
Yes.
Because Xanax is, like most other benzodiazepines, is a drug that's subject to what's called tolerance. What does that mean? Simply put, if any of you drink alcohol, you probably noticed that the first time you drank alcohol it had a certain effect on you, but as you continue to drink and get older, you seem to need more of the alcohol to get the same effect. That's tolerance. So you need more of the drug for it to do the same thing. Xanax is certainly prone to that. So looking at a blood level in a post-mortem setting doesn't tell you a lot about whether that person was taking too much or it's had an effect on them, or this could be her normal. This could be just the amount she needs to have to be on a steady keel. Maybe it was a lot higher in the day, and this is just a snapshot of what we caught. There's also another reason to make it complicated for you. I mean, it does take a while to get through all of this. There's a thing called post-mortem redistribution, okay, and that is a circumstance where if you take a certain drug or certain drugs for long enough in your life, you would think that they go in, circulate around your blood, and then the body gets rid of them. Not true. Right? If you take certain drugs long enough, the body goes in, circulate around the blood, and then there's part of them are stored, sequestered, like a jury is sequestered in a room, and they're not available to the body, but they've dissolved in the fatty tissues, or they've dissolved in other compartments of our body, which is water, fat, protein, and so on. And then after death, when you die, those stores are released and they go back into the blood. Some of them do. So sometimes the blood result you're looking at is actually higher than it would have been when she was alive, or anybody was alive. So it's another factor we have to take into account, and Xanax is one of those drugs. So depending on how long and how much she was taken, this 27 could be a little higher than what it would have been at the time of her death. But in any event, it is not at a level that would concern me that it participated in her death, that it would have impaired her beyond some extraordinary means. It's almost, if you're doing enough of these cases long enough, 27 is not high, and it wouldn't concern me personally.
Okay. But it could be above a therapeutic dose that a doctor prescribed to her.
Yeah, so again, for the same reason I've just explained,
Yep.
therapeutic, we can't use the terms therapeutic because we're not dealing with a therapeutic situation because it's post-mortem. And secondly, I don't know how much she's been prescribed or how
Or
much
if
she's
she's
taken.
been prescribed.
Or even if she is
Right.
being prescribed. Correct. I don't know that.
Okay. So then let's go to the amphetamine. What is amphetamine?
So amphetamine is a stimulant drug. It's belonged to the amphetamine class. It's a subclass of another division of drugs called the phenylethylamines, of which that's an entirely large family. But the amphetamines have been around for quite a while, maybe late 1800s, early 1900s. They really became into their own in probably World War II, when the German army figured out that by giving them to the soldiers that they needed less food and they could stay awake longer because they were running out of men. So they needed the few men to have. So they were given, Hitler famously was partly, one of the many drugs he was taking was an amphetamine. So they've been around a long time.
So basically, it's what some people refer to as speed or an upper.
It's an upper, it's a stimulant. It activates the nervous system to reduce tiredness or appetite and to stimulate the sensation of being awake.
Which is sort of the opposite of what a benzodiazepine or alprazolam is designed to do.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Amphetamines can cause side effects such as erratic behavior
Yes.
and sometimes even violence.
Any stimulant can be associated with violent behavior in certain people at certain times, yes.
And Katherine Griffith had both amphetamines and alprazolam in her blood.
Yep, the amphetamine is reported at less than 0.1 milligram per litre, which is about 100 nanograms per mil. It's a very, very low amount, but it's there.
Do you know if she had been prescribed amphetamines?
I do not know that.
I don't have any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Redirect.
Just briefly, Your Honor. Doctor, could you tell the jury about amphetamines being prescribed for like a legal prescription? What would be an example of that to treat what?
Yeah, so amphetamines are prescribed, can be prescribed. The more common one is ADHD. So typically, there are several formulas available on the commercial market. So that's one, and the other one that I know of is narcolepsy. People who suffer from sudden bouts of falling asleep can be prescribed amphetamine. So there are genuine, legitimate reasons why somebody may have it in their bloodstream.
The two substances in Kathy Griffith's toxicology results, is it a fair statement they have nothing to do with their cause of death or manner of death?
I don't believe so, no.
All right, I have no further questions for you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is he released?
Yes, sir.
Sworn in?
Yes, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Doctor.
God. Thank you. Thank you.